I will talk about two MA theses, master's thesis, two sociological, two master's theses in sociology, actually by two women on two types of movement of women. Okay. Now, this first, I would like to show you the table of contents of these two theses. Let me share my screen where I have the table of contents of these two theses, and then I will show you. Okay, now the first one. Okay, so here you see two opposing movements of women, social political movements of women in Turkey, Socialist and Islamist. In 1970s, Socialist. In 1990s, and into the millennium, Islamist. Okay, now the first one by Emel Akal. The thesis was carried out in the second half of 1990s, and it is titled "Women and Socialism in Turkey: the Case of Progressive Women's Organization, ilerici Kadınlar Dernegi." Okay, now table of contents. So she goes. I will briefly summarize both theses, but this one, as you see here, there's an introduction. Why Emel Akal did such a research on a women's movement, a socialist women's movement in the second half of 1980s, from 1975 to 1980. With the coup d'etat in 1980, it was closed. So there's that introduction, and then method of research, oral history or in-depth interviews. And then she goes into the background of socialist movement, Marx, Engels, utopian movement, and then how in the socialist movement, what was the role of women, to what extent it was covered, and she thinks that it was not covered. She says that there's a need for research on women's role in socialist movement. And then she comes into women in socialist movement in Turkey, and then she gives a brief history, and then why women became socialists, why and how she goes into that. And then the case study, as a case study, an association, a Dernegi, association of women, the Progressive Women's Association. Its founding in 1975, its relationship with the party, the Communist Party, what kind of women's organization, its relationship with feminism, its journal, the Voice of the Woman journal, and its activities in the 5 years between 1975 and 1980. And then a conclusion. Now, the second one is Vildan Özertürk Sofu's MA thesis, defended in 2014, but I think she did this research 2013, 2012, around that time. The title is The End of Meaning. The End of Meaning, colon, the effect of gaze and labeling on social relations. Now, she did this, her MA research and thesis in Yıldız Technical University, Sociology department. Now, the content of this thesis, now the problem is statement of the problem, of course, an introduction in the introduction, and significance of this dissertation, this research. And then she goes into methodology. Now, her research is content analysis of a novel by Elif Shafak, The Gaze, and review of some of the publications of women in Turkey and in Germany. So that's her methodology. And then she goes into theories of gaze and labeling. Gaze and labeling. So when she goes into the theories of gaze, she starts with the gaze of Orpheus, a historical analysis. And then she goes into other stories of gaze and how in Western philosophy there is an ocular centrist approach from Plato to Hegel and maybe to Foucault, and she reviews all these theories, and then ocular centrism and anti-ocular centrism, the counter-enlightenment reactions, and then what triggers the gaze, the relationship between self-image construction and gaze, exposure to the external gaze, etc. And then different types of gaze like cinematic gaze, traveler's gaze, nationalist gaze, virtual gaze. And then she tries to summarize all these approaches. And then she goes into theory of labeling, Howard Becker's theory of labeling. You will remember Howard Becker from symbolic interactionist theories that you reviewed during your second year history of sociology course. And then she goes into the case of falsely accused deviant, falsely accused type of deviant, and self-labeling, struggling to prove otherwise, double labeling, the politics of labeling, and the gaze back, the vicious circle of gaze, the gaze back of the other, and the gaze back of other reactions of the gazee, the one who is looked at, the one who is gazed, and then comparison over Elif Shafak's novel, The Gaze, submitting to the label but hiding the difference, versus resisting the label, exposing the difference. These are interesting distinctions. And then she goes into visibility as resistance, and she goes here into headscarf movement of students during last quarter of 80s, last half of 80s and 90s, the headscarf movement, and hijabi fashion. And then she also gives the example of linguistic resistance. This is the Kanak Sprach, Kanak Kanak is the word used for the Turkish people in Germany. Sprach, the Kanak word, or the speaking of the Turkish people of anyway, we will come to that. Trying to prove otherwise, submitting to the label, resisting the label, and last, object has gazed back, and the conclusion. Okay, now let me send this. Emel Akal, in this study, The Woman and Socialism in Turkey, through this association, İlerici Kadınlar Derneği, Progressive Women's Association. Now, in this study, she says that the main purpose was to make a counter argument. Actually, in both theses, there is a counter argument, an opposition to the common sense accepted view of the topic. So they, anyways, social science is something, finding out beyond the accepted common sense view, already known. Instead of already known, a further knowledge, a further regularity or something. So in this study, Emel Akal is trying to do a counter argument against what? Against dominant socialist discourse. Now, what is this dominant socialist discourse? This dominant socialist discourse, while presenting its history or reconstructing, remembering its history, it ignored and disregarded the specific role of women, within Turkish socialist movement. But now Emel Akal is saying that that's wrong. No, there was a voice, a participation by women in the history of the development of socialist movement in Turkey, although it was suppressed with 1980, the military intervention, military coup d'etat, but it was there historically. We cannot forget about it, and actually we should bring it out into the open. But she says that, as a matter of fact, ignoring or disregarding the role of women in socialist movement is not specific to Turkey or to Turkish socialist movement. No, in other countries as well, it's ignored. It is forgotten. It is even repressed. For example, she gives an example of the history of French resistance. France was occupied during Second World War by the Nazi army, the German fascist army, Nazi army, and people were resisting, underground, fighting against the occupation of the German army of Paris and of France. And in the underground, in the resistance, there were both women and men. But when historians are writing the history of resistance, they ignore women. And one of the researchers, again, women researchers, she says that they ignore women because in their mind, resistance, fighting against fascism is a male business, having guns and fighting against the oppressive, the German army was such a oppressive army and repressive army, how women can take place in resistance. But there were women resistors, women partisans, not only in France, but in other countries, in even, for example, in Greece, there was, or in Italy, or in Spain, for example. If you read Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls, Çanlar Kimin için Çalıyor, in that novel, you will see, for example, that Hemingway is talking about women resistors, to Franco-fascism in Spain, and or even before that, during the Civil War there. So that's what she's trying to show, how women were active, not only during this 1975-1980 progressive women's organization, but earlier. She's an historical sociologist, so she goes into the history of socialist movement. And for example, she goes into 1920s, and there are names of socialist women like Rahime Selimova, Fatma Hanım, Naciye Hanım, or Zehra Kosova, Mediha Özçelik, Zeliha Okyalaz, Sabiha Sertel, Sevim Belli, Sevinç Özgüner, of course, one of the sociologists, Behice Boran, from a later period. There were all these women. Now, although there is not much research, sociological research about women's role in the socialist movement, but there are some women writers, Turkish women writers, like, for example, Sevgi Soysal. Sevgi Soysal wrote about Yıldırım Women's Bloc. Now, this is actually women being imprisoned after, again, another coup d'etat, 1971 coup d'etat. There were, again, leftist women, socialist women being caught and put into jail. And Sevgi Soysal wrote a novel or a report, kind of, about them. Or Firuzan, again, another woman of this the woman and man, actually, 47 born generation. Those who are born in 1947 and 1971, 1968 youth movement, and 1971 coup d'etat, how they were captured, and there were other women, again, telling about women's role in this socialist movement, like Latife Tekin's Gece Dersleri, Night Classes, or Afet Ilgaz's Stages, Aşamalar, and Yıldız Sertel's, Sabiha Sertel's biography, written by Yıldız Sertel, her daughter, and autobiography of Sevim Belli. These are all women writing about their own involvement, their own history. So what is she trying to do in this thesis is, through the case of the Progressive Women's Association, the study of Progressive Women's Association, she is trying to answer how women adopted socialist ideas, which women became revolutionary, socialist, and why and how they founded this association, and how they viewed women's question, what were their demands as women, and the organizational structure of this association, and the actions, the activities, what kind of activities, campaigns they carried out. You know, she goes into that. Now this was introduction, you know, and then she goes into her method. You know, for you too, whenever you are doing a research and reporting on your research, you have to introduce your problematic. Yeah, what is your problem? Why you did this research? What are you aiming at? What is the significance of your research? And then you have to go into your method, method of research. How did you collect the data? So oral history method, depth interviews. You know from your second year 2 semester methodology courses, especially in the second semester. You know, it was qualitative data gathering, you know, qualitative methodology. So Emel Akal uses oral history and interview method, or you know, there might be other names to it, case study, biographical interviews, or life histories, or personal narratives. So she interviewed actually those who were actively involved in the association, and in the central branch, the center of the association, and regional branches of the association. And she also discusses, she problematizes her position as a researcher, because she was a member of this association between 1975 and 1980. So of course there is a kind of bias, but this bias is also gives her an internal subjective look. You know, in sociology, Habermas, for example, formulates sociological methodology, both the actor's point of view, the subjective point of view, and objective system theory point of view, from theory and from the actor. So Emel Akal formulates her position. Yes, she has a subjective and actor's point of view, but being a sociologist and adopting sociological theories, look, perspective, and methodology, sociological methodology, she is trying to be objective as possible. Okay, and then after this methodology chapter, she goes into history of socialist movement and women's role, and then I will not go into those. And then she comes to Turkey. I already mentioned Zehra Kosova, for example. Zehra Kosova is a worker in cigarette factory in 1920s. No, as a matter of fact, she was born in Kavala, Kosovo, Kavala, and in 1924 migrated to Turkey. And Zehra started to work in a state tobacco industry, and then she became socialist, and she went to Moscow She married there, and then she had a child. She came back. She organized tobacco workers union, actually, in around this is when was this 1946, around in actually with the transition to multi-party system in 1946, there was a relatively democratic situation in Turkey, and she was one of the organizers of Tobacco Workers Union, and she was the head of the union, actually, and there were 35,000 members of the union, but unfortunately that democratic atmosphere ended, and it was the union was closed, and she was arrested in 1951 together with Behice Boran, Mübeccel Kray. When you become a fourth-year student, when we are talking about history of sociology in Turkey, we will talk about Behice Boran's and Mübeccel Kray's sociological research. But here, a worker, a tobacco industry worker, Zehra Kosova, was arrested together with them. And actually, she continued her research, but I mean her work, and actually in 1951 there were 167 arrested, and some 8 of them were women, like the one Zehra Kosova, Sevim Belli, Sevim Tandelli, dentist Sevinç Özgüner, Mübeccel Kray, Sıdıka Umutsu, Ruhi Su's wife, actually, Güler Ordemir, Melahat Türksal, Selçuk Uraz, as I already said, Behice Boran, Mübeccel Kray. Okay, you know, these were actually Mübeccel Kray did her PhD in America, came back in 1950, and they opposed Turkey's joining of Korean War, and sending soldiers to Korea, so they were arrested. Anyway, these are the women. Of course, there were also the rest of 167 were men. Okay, now, who are these socialist women? What observations she developed, Emel Akal developed? She says that these women were mostly daughters of army officers. And army, as there were coup d'etat, arrested them, but earlier the army officers were allowing or encouraging their daughters. Actually, you know, this is a general observation about the Republican bureaucracy. The bureaucrats in the Republican bureaucracy, you know, during 1930s, 40s, 50s, onwards perhaps up to, I don't know, 60s, 70s, they encouraged, you know, their daughters to be educated as much as possible, as teachers, as civil servants, or as academicians. Okay, so they were. Second, these women were not subject to discrimination in relation to their brothers. So their brothers and them, they were given in their families equal chance of education. And their families made great sacrifices to enable them to gain best possible education. And thirdly, these women were mostly intellectual women, and before they became socialists, they were already Kemalists or existentialists, or they were familiar with anarchism or Taoism, and then they adopted socialism as a way for Turkey's solution of the problems. Fourthly, the schools they studied gave them an awareness of classes, unequal distribution of property and of income. These are some of observations. And then she goes into the founding of the association and the role of, for example, Turkish Communist Party. What was the role? She says there was some encouragement by the party, and among the founders there were members, but there were also non-party members. Non-party members. So it was beyond parties, the socialist parties that existed at the time. As a matter of fact, some of the parties opposed the founding of Socialist Women's Association because that will steal away, that will divert attention from workers' situation, to women's situation. This is at the time, 1970s, there were all these discussions. For example, I personally remember, Turkish Social Science Association. I was a member of that Turkish Social Science Association. As a matter of fact, I was a member of executive committee, and we organized a Women and Society seminar, in Istanbul. I didn't present a paper, but Mübeccel Kırahi, Kağıtçıoğlu Çiğdem, Kağıtçıbaşı, and Deniz Kandiyoti, and many others presented papers. And at the time, for example, personally, myself, I was thinking, yes, there is this women's movement, women and children, and instead of women and man as equal citizens having their own participation, even as a sociologist in 1970s, I was thinking sociology of women, sociology of gender, as like sociology of children or minorities, something like that. But women are not in minority, it's half and half, or even there are more women in the society, slightly more, instead of 50-50, it is 50 point something women, 49 point something man, in spite of that, at the time, I am giving myself as an example because, this was general, even as a sociologist, can you imagine, this is 1970s. Okay, I am still young. I obtained my PhD in 1975, and these seminars were in 1976, 77, 78, around that time. And I wasn't aware, for example, at that time, the İKD, İlerici Kadınlar Dernegi Association, were being founded, but while it's being founded, but later of course, I learned about it, and you know, some of my friends became members of it or arrested because of it. Anyway, okay. Now, for example, a very close friend of mine, my classmate, Filiz Kardam, was one of the, like Emel Akal, they were members, and because of their membership, after 1980 coup d'etat, they were persecuted. Okay, now Emel Akal says that at the time of founding of this association, there were members from various sectors, and you know, when they established also a journal, The Voice of the Woman, Kadınların Sesi, Kadınların Sesi, in that journal, they were saying about, they were defending true equality in education, employment, employment opportunities, promotion, and payment, you know, paying different wages, although it is in the same kind of job, you know, a discrimination. And then motherhood must be seen as a social function. You know, it is not a private function, private job of women. No, it is a social function. It is society's concern. It should be. I already said about equal pay must be given for equal job position. Existing legal rights and must be put into practice. Existing legal rights and equalities, although they are in law, but they are not being implemented. So the laws humiliating women must be changed, must be amended. You know, these were, you know, she took these from their journal, Kadınların Sesi, The Voice of Women. These were defended there. Now, actually, she says that women at that time, the members of this association, did not see their position very differently from today's feminists, but somehow they didn't think of things that present, or you know, when she was writing this thesis during 1990s. During 1990s, for example, women started demanding, you know, like, you know, my body belongs to me. You know, this was one of the slogans. You know, you cannot intervene, you cannot decide about my body. Or like, for example, abortion, whether abortion will be a right of the woman, or whether, you know, whether it should be forbidden or not. You know, they didn't make that an issue. Or divorce. Now they said divorce should be made easier and uncomplicated, and rights should be protected. But that's all. You know, they didn't question it. They didn't go around it. What happens when women are divorced, especially if they are not working, if they are kids? What will be the status? Or especially, they didn't say anything about the violence in the family. You know, there are laws now preventing violence in the family, but they didn't go into that at all. You know, so she's actually criticizing, you know, her, you know, as a member of the association, why they couldn't think of this, because they couldn't think of this because the socialist movement at that time subordinated women's issues to the general issue of workers' liberation, workers' rights. And the position was, if workers' rights are given, in the society, if system is changed in such a way that all members of society will be equal, women question will be also solved. Now, and then she goes into Soviet Union. Okay, there was some practice there. Women were working. Okay, they had education. Okay, but they were not still. The specific women's issues were not solved in Soviet Union. So these came into discussion by women, especially during 80s and 90s, as second and third wave feminists started questioning all these. And then, okay, I will finish this thesis here. She gives percentages of percentage of workers, for example, in this women's association was something like 22% were workers. So majority actually were housewives. 32% of the members were housewives. 17% were teachers. 10% were white collar workers. So if you think of white collar workers and blue collar workers together, the two together will be 32%, which will be equal to 32% of housewife. And then students were 8%, peasants were 1%, self-employed was 3%, health workers were 7%. So, but she has this, before I end the review of her thesis, Emel Akal's thesis, let me quote this sentence from her. She says that, or the ones whom she interviewed, she says that the Progressive Women's Association had been successful in reaching women workers, housewives, office workers, but it had not been successful in attracting intellectual women. That as the members, the majority of members of İKD, Progressive Women's Association, and then she goes how towards 1980 there were many members being attacked and, as a matter of fact, killed. Okay, now let me end it there. Now let me go into the second master's thesis by Vildan, Özertürk, Sofu, as I said, which was written in 2014. And the end of meaning, this is a paradoxical title, according to me. Meaning, the end of meaning, it is like, the end of history or the end of man or something like that, because, but I will come why she chooses this title. The second subtitle is The Effect of Gaze and Labeling on Social Relations. And so the end of meaning is impossibility to reach the ultimate meaning. Now, the meaning we have is our constructed meaning. Now, maybe I am giving my own interpretation. Let me not do that now. Let me go into into her thesis, and let me try to summarize her findings, her approach. But before I do that, I would like to share two tables that she uses from Sociology of Deviants, Sociology of Social Control and Deviants. You might have taken, or criminology, this course from Nurgin Hoca. You know, this is Nurgin Oktürk Hoca's fields, one of her fields of research, actually, and Dr. Sofu uses, Vildan Özertürk Sofu uses this theory extensively and adds theory of gaze to theory of deviance or theory of labeling, etiketleme. Now let me, as I said, share these two tables. Then when you see the tables, you will understand her arguments, I hope, better. Okay, let me go here. Let me go here. And okay, here is the first table. You see types of deviance. Okay, now two variables, perceived as deviant and not perceived as deviant. Perception is one variable, and obedience to the rule or relationship with the rule is another variable. So there are 2 by 2 table. Perception, perceived as deviant, not perceived as deviant. The other, the column of the table is obedient behavior and rule-breaking behavior. Okay. Now, if perceived as deviant, but obedient to the rules, to the norms, then actually that person is not deviant, but falsely accused as deviant. Falsely accused as deviant. And actually, Vildan Sofu goes into this cell here, and she divides that into further 4. Okay, not before that, let's complete this table. Now, perceived as deviant and breaking the rule, rule-breaking behavior, then that is deviant, pure deviant. Now, pure deviant might be a criminal or a musician or a genius, you know, an artist. An artist might be breaking some rules, some norms of the society, but a creative artist, or breaking some rules, the laws, and stealing, a burglar, you know, more in the negative deviance and positive deviance, pure deviant. Not perceived as deviant, now, not perceived as deviant and conforming, obedient behavior. So that's conformist. Okay, not perceived as deviant, but rule breaking. So that is a secret deviant. Now, again, some of the artists might be secret deviants, or you know, somebody might be stealing bank accounts, but she might be not perceived as a deviant and working in the bank, continuing to work in the bank. So until she is being discovered as stealing from the accounts of the people, he is a secret deviant, in the negative sense of deviance, or a positive deviance, secret deviance. Somebody can hide their deviant behavior, but they might be breaking some rules, and again artistically creative, or even scientifically being against the already established systems of thinking. You know, for example, Foucault says that thinking is rule breaking or transgression of the rules. Transgression. Thinking is transgression. You know, Foucault, of course, exposes himself as being deviant. Now, in both senses, in the case of gender relationships and sexuality, and also in terms of thinking, he was thinking, theorizing in such a way that he changed the theoretical approaches in the social science. Okay, now the second table, as I said, is focusing on this falsely accused. You see this falsely accused here. So she's focusing on that, and then she's dividing that in terms of the deviant, or is a difference. Yeah? Now, there are differences in the society, but some differences are labeled as deviant. Now, some differences might be labeled as deviant, but the person might be hiding that difference. You know, if it is not open, you know, like a body quality, color, or some other thing, you know, if it is something that can be hidden, yes. But some other people unable to hide, or on the contrary, exposing the difference. So the raw variable is these two, one variable. The other variable is submitting to the label and resisting against the label. So the first cell then is submitting to the label, but hiding the difference. But the second one is more interesting. Resisting the difference, resisting the label, but hiding the difference. Now, the third one is submitting and exposing. Now, accepting that, for example, ethnicity labeling, and exposing that ethnicity, or being some kind of deviance, some other kind of deviance. Resisting, not submitting, resisting the label, and also exposing the difference. Now, she goes into these types of differences, not only from the theory of labeling, you know, Howard Becker's famous book, Outsiders, which is translated into Turkish as well. Some of his other books as well, and I'm sure in your second year History of Sociology course in the second semester, you went into the symbolic interactionists, and how, you know, they, for example, Howard Becker studied the artists, the musicians, and how the meaning attributed to the things and to the events is constructed through symbolic interaction, through interaction. The source of the meaning is not in the event itself or in the thing in itself, but it is in the interaction. People, by interacting, becomes, for example, cigarette addicts. Cigarette in itself does not make one a cigarette addict. Friends make one a cigarette addict. Anyway, okay. Now this is just remind you Howard Becker's theory of labeling and deviance and whatever. Okay, now she says that this dissertation, she says, will go deeper into the falsely accused deviants category, whose conscious, such as religious beliefs, or given characteristics, such as gender and race, woman and man, or black, white, race, yellow, Chinese, Japanese, Caucasian, whatever, become the cause of their being tagged, labeled with labels. Tagging with the labels, you know, yapıştırmak, tagging. Moreover, the analysis will not limit itself to the individual actions which are labeled as deviant, but will rather focus on the counter reactions. Emel Akal was focusing or developing counter arguments, whereas Sofu, Vildan Sofu, Özertürk Sofu is focusing on counter reactions against labeling, reactions against labeling. Within a number of discourses ranging from gender, race, religion, power, in terms of gender, race, religion, and power. Through this analysis of the false accused deviants, the dissertation aims to explore and better understand the effects of labeling creates on the labeled individual, as well as the psychology lying beneath the actions of a labeled individual. Okay, as labeled as the deviant by the dominant groups. Now, again, in the second semester, you have seen, symbolic interactionists working on this type of stigma. Okay. And then she says that her combination of gaze theory and labeling theory takes her into into a history of philosophy, history of sociological theories, the concept of gaze and social theory, developing, the gaze becoming a double-sided term, the gaze of the subject and the gaze back of the object, in the object-subject relationship. She really goes into all this, and she says that the dissertation will present in details the theory of gaze in the first chapter. It will basically put forward close relation between gaze and construction of identity, together with the notion of gaze back of the object. the later further puts the gazer to self-questioning of her identity, which may lead to deconstruction of this constructed identity. Here, she gives reference to Hegel, to Lacan, to Sartre. Okay. Now, I will not really go into details of all these. Now, she starts actually with the gaze of Orpheus, and this is a Greek mythology. Now, Orpheus, love Euripides dies and goes to the underground. But somehow, Orpheus is given the right to go into the underground, or in the mythological, where the dead are present, goes there and fetches, finds Eurydice, and now they are from darkness, from underground, coming into the light, into this world, from the other world to this world. Now, Orpheus is given this right, this privilege, going to see his love and bring her back to this world, on one condition, that he will never look back. He will never look back. Okay? So now this is quotation from Sofu, Vildan Sofu's thesis. Everything goes well until the very last moment, when Orpheus reaches the daylight, but his beloved Eurydice is still in darkness, still in the world of death, the other world. At that very moment, Orpheus feels the insurmountable, unresistible urge to look, okay, gaze, to look at Eurydice in the face. But Eurydice is still in the dark. So, against the forbidding of looking back of the gods in the mythological world, Orpheus looks back to the Eurydice's face to see her in her form that is forbidden to the mortal gaze. Now the mortals, the gods, can see the dead, the world of dead, but not human beings. Human beings is forbidden to see the dead people. So actually Orpheus should bring Eurydice into this world and then see her when she is already in the light. But he wanted to see her while she was in the world of the dead, in the other world. But this look, this gaze, this mortal gaze was forbidden. So actually, he felt an irresistible urge to grasp the essence of that. The essence of that. What is that? Everybody is curious about that. What is that? What happens when we die? So he wanted to define the ultimate meaning, define the ultimate meaning by looking at it, by gaze. But at that very moment, and he looks back, and at that moment, very moment, he loses the meaning forever. He loses the meaning forever with that one faint word. Now, Yıldız says only, he hears only one last word as she disappears. Farewell. Farewell. Allah'a ısmarladık. Farewell. Hoşça kal. So he was unable to see the ultimate meaning. So, you know, her title, The End of Meaning, the title of her thesis, you know, here I think is being explained. So actually, now she continues. Of course, Orpheus is now feeling wretched. You know, why did he do that? But so Orpheus returns to this world, to the mortal world, to the world of the mortals. All human beings are mortal. Bütün insanlar ölümlüdür. Ölümlülerin dünyası. The mortal world with a far greater loss than before his descent to the other world. Now, before, all he lost was his dear wife. But now, he has also lost his self-confidence that he could grasp the ultimate meaning. That's the meaning. He could grasp the ultimate meaning, the meaning. First, out of mere curiosity, he just wants to look, to see, gaze. However, eventually, he cannot help but gazes to define. This comes to him as a painful and dearly paid awakening from his long-delved illusion. What is the illusion? The illusion of mastery, illusion of power, illusion of superiority over the other, illusion of mastery, hakimiyet, iktidar, üstünlük, the illusion of mastery, power, and superiority over the other. Öteki üzerine olan iktidar, üstünlük, hakimiyet. This is actually an illusion, but human beings fight for this, devote their lives to this. Orpheus here is an example who lost this illusion, is disillusioned. Okay, now then he goes into the theory of gaze, starting from the famous master-slave dialectic of Hegel in the chapter of the Geist, the independent and dependent self-consciousness. That is the title of the chapter. The master and slave, or lordship and bondage. You know, this is in his phenomenology of the Geist, phenomenology of the spirit. Now, in this dialectic, the subject and the object negate one another until they are unified in the absolute knowledge, that being the Geist. Now, the idealist philosophy of Hegel hoped that he reached what Orpheus missed, actually, being an idealist philosopher. But as we know, Marx said that he was in the illusion of discovering the absolute spirit. Geist, whereas consciousness, human consciousness, is a dependent variable. Independent conditioning is the conditions of material life of human beings. Okay, I will not go into that. You remember that from your history of sociology classes. Now, but Vildan Özertürk Sofu goes into Sartre, who uses Hegel's master-slave dialectic, and he goes into looking back. He views the gazer, how the gazer is being seen by the gazee. But before she explains that further, she goes into a theorist, Jacques Lacan. Now, Lacan is a very difficult theorist, and she goes into that and how Lacan's mirror stage in the growth of the child, how the child grows to an age, 12 months, 13 months, 2 years, around that time, looks at the mirror and sees himself in totality. Totality. Who is that? First, he thinks that it is someone else. He calls, and then eventually she realizes that that is the one in the mirror, in a totality. She sees himself. He gazes into himself, herself. Now, here actually, the gaze back, she goes into that. Lacan reinterpreting Freud in the subject and other, the subject and object relationship, subject and other relationship, and how Lacan says that human beings are born into systems of signs with its signifiers and signified, and learns to speak and think within this pre-established system. Actually, he has a trio: the real, the imagined, and the symbolic. The symbolic. How human beings, children, are born into that. So how what you see in the mirror, that's that retinal experience is recognized with the codes of recognition that comes to us from our social milieu. How we are inserted into the systems of visual discourse, and so the world that a world existed, the symbolic world, the imaginary world, the real existed before I existed, and that world will go on. I am no longer. I think we are no longer. Okay, that is Lacan. And then you remember again Foucault's panopticon gaze and power, from absolute power to panopticon type of power, disciplinary power in the prison, the birth of prison, and biopolitical power, 3 types of power, and how the guardian in the tower, in the center of this panopticon type of prison, sees the prisoners, although he is not present, or she is not present in the tower, you know, and how the prisoners internalize that control, you know, that gaze, actually, surveillance. This is what that Foucault calls it, a surveillance, that especially in modern times, how through social media are presenting, you know, people are presenting themselves through Facebook and through Twitter, how subjects are presenting themselves to the gaze of the other, and imagines, in this case, an acknowledgement of the other, which will enable the subject to assume his her subjectness and power over objects around him, like in the mirror stage. But of course, this is a double-edged relationship, and especially in the online networks. So she says this. Okay, let me quote this. Online social network sites, in a way, reverse the looking relationships. Now, from traditionally voyeuristic master subject is the subject looking others, gazing others, voyeuristic, to an exhibitionist subject. So voyeuristic master subject is looking at exhibited objects exhibition, exhibited object. Now the reversal with Facebook and other social media. Now the subject is exhibitionist subject. Now the other is voyeuristic, is gazing back, gazing at the subject. So the exhibitionism, different than being exhibited, there is the will and active consciousness of the individual, which seems to prevent him, her, from being victimized by the other's gaze and being labeled. So we expose ourselves in our Facebook pages, but we are not, although some are victimized, but most of them are not victimized. On the contrary, they are recognized. Anyway, she says, quite paradoxically, the individual in his virtual identity desires to be labeled in the form of tags through others' gaze, like, you know, how many likes she gets or he gets. So actually, she goes into other types of gaze, cinematic gaze, for example. Feminist sociologists analyzed films like you will do, and how through films, film industry basically is a male industry. So in these films, usually man basically exerts his power on woman through his gaze, which triangulates. Now this male gaze in the cinema, in the films, triangulates vision, knowledge, and power. Three things are being combined in this male gaze. Now, when the man, as the scenario writer or filmmaker or watcher, watching a movie, where most of the films, if they are not consciously done by women and in a liberated way, it is patriarchal. Men are dominant and controlling the woman, deviant woman, or this type of woman, or that type of woman, so in that male gaze, there is combination of vision, knowledge, and power. This is really Sofu's summarizing of this cinematic gaze literature, this vision, knowledge, power triangle, from triangle, triangulation. Triangulation. So in this, now the Hollywood films, what Hollywood films achieves, this is a quotation, is just another constructed dichotomy of active subject looking male, active subject özne looking male, and passive, objectified, being looked at female, with the female whose form is styled accordingly, whose style, who's shaped according to this active looking male perspective, that is within the dominant male discourse, with their appearance coded for strong visual erotic impact, so that they can be said to connote to be looked atness, And then she goes into traveler's gaze, how the tourists are looking for pleasure, or how the political, or that are traveling for political or religious survival, or there is missionary zeal, where they go to preach their religion, or just for greed, or coerced to travel, as in the case of slave trade, or traveling to earn money, like guest workers, Gastarbeiter, in Germany. Their gaze, how they look to their environment, and how they influence their environment, and then how they are influenced back. Now, at this point, she goes into this double labeling intersectionality, and she gives the example of, let me see. Now, here she goes into the attack. Now, in Germany, what is this? Just a minute. The Kanak-Sprach. The Kanak-Sprach is a good example of, from Gastarbeiter, second and third generation, how another way of resisting to a given label is to be virtually adopted, the very label, but only by reappropriating it into one's advantage. Now, the Kanaki is the third generation Turks. The verbal power expresses itself in an expulsive, short-winded, hybrid stammering without period or comma, with arbitrarily placed pauses and improvised expressions. The Kanaki speaks his mother tongue only imperfectly. His command of Alamanish is limited. His vocabulary is comprised of gibberized words of expression that exist in neither language, he exemplifies his freestyle sermon with gestures, and facial expressions. You know, this was a quote from Sofu's this chapter, language of resistance, how through language those labeled as deviant, as Kanak, you know, those youth are labeled as Kanak Sprach by the German majority, but they strike back, react to that labeling and to that dominant, powerful, dominating gaze by accepting Kanak and turning it from negative into positive. So, you know, her thesis actually is based on Elif Shafak's novel, The Gaze, Mahrem. It is translated into Turkish, but I think it was written in English. Now, it is that novel is contrasting submitting to the label but hiding the difference versus resisting the label and exposing the difference. You know, a fatty person and a short person, a fatty female and a short male, you know, the two are living together, and they adopt these two. Now, the female submits to the label, but tries to hide the difference, whereas the man is resisting the label to be called shorty or whatever, and exposing the difference, going out, etc. Now, I will not go into that. I don't know whether any of you read that novel, but Vildan Sofu uses that as an example to illustrate her analysis of Kanaki in Germany, or the Hicabi Fashion in Turkey. In the chapter, Resisting the Label, Exposing the Difference. Okay, this is a sub-chapter of 4th chapter of the thesis. Now, visibility as a resistance, visibility, showing themselves. Now, increasing popularity of tesettür, Hicabi fashion. Now, and she says, this is a quotation, within the context of Turkish society, it is possible to come across examples of resist, expose, resist, and expose reaction. One of them could be the recent rise of Hicabi fashion or tesettür. In order to be better able to understand this recent rise, especially within the last few years, it is crucial to be aware of the underlying factors paving the path during the last 3 decades of Turkish politics and social life. So she goes into a history of Turkey from 1980 coup d'etat to 1910s. So she says, following the 1980 military coup, an increasing consciousness and fear against Islamization of the state jutted to the surface, while the mainstream media ran a flux of images of women all covered in black during the 1979 Islamic Revolution of Iran. And this fear being more and more increasing among the among the secular man and woman in Turkey. And after the 1980 coup d'etat, how the Higher Education Council first allowed the headscarf coming for women, for Muslim women, feminist women coming to school with their headscarves, and then forbidding it, allowing forbidding, and that became a very political, ideological, cultural issue. And through that interviews, it is being studied. For example, Nilüfer Gölez's modern mahrem, modern gaze, maybe modern mahrem, if we use Elif Shafak's gaze being translated as mahrem. Okay, forbidden modern. Now into English, it is translated as forbidden modern. But a similar study is being carried out by Vildan Sofu, actually. And she's explaining it as resistance, resisting against the label, and accepting the difference, being visible, exposing. During 90s, there were young headscarfed students, demonstrating in Istanbul, in front of Istanbul University or other universities, or in Ankara in front of universities. These were, it was a political movement. How this political movement emerged and being, articulated with a larger political movement of political Islam, Okay, I think I have to stop. I advise you to read it. It's a good thing. But before I end, I would like to end it with his cosmopolitanism analysis, about the differences. And here she goes into John Tomlinson's Globalization and Culture, published in 1999, and the chapter, The Possibility of Cosmopolitanism. Now, a cosmopolitan is a citizen of the world. Now, this is from Tomlinson, free from national limitations and prejudices. Now, this is a quotation. Yet being a citizen of the world does not necessarily mean only being available to and accessing the diversity in the world. This could be the definition of the global. Now, cosmopolitanism includes belonging, involvement, and responsibility, and integration of the broader concerns into everyday life practices. Here, the metropolitan citizen, for metropolitan citizen, there is a plurality of isolations. Instead of, or in him, there is not the tolerant indifference of the metropolitan citizen, rather a willingness to engage with the other. But she says the other should be in quotation, because if you don't put the quotation marks, as if the cosmopolitan is accepting the otherness. No, the cosmopolitan is not accepting the other. So when we say cosmopolitan is willing to engage with the other should be in quotation marks, because a true cosmopolitan, in fact, there are no others. There are no others. Okay, so the end of the description of the thesis. But Vildan Sofu goes into a research by Gök Arıksel and Anna Sekor. The title of the article, "You Can't Know How They Are Inside: The Ambivalence of Veiling and Discourse of the Other in Turkey." For example, for your second homework, you can choose this article. So here, the woman with headscarf is thinking about the women that are veiled with the black linen, çarşaf. So that's interesting article. And Vildan Özertürk Sofu's, there is an article, she has an article in 2015, "Modern Muslim, a Possibility or a Paradox." You can find that, and also you can read that. And another one, Hesna Serra Aksel's "Producing the Category of Islamist Woman, a Delusion Perspective." So Hesna Serra Aksel uses a delusion ontology and epistemology to develop, to analyze Islamist women, like actually similar to Judith Butler's analysis in her books, especially the psychic power, analysis of psychology of power. Okay, anyway, let me stop here, and let me see how you are tired as well listening to me. I am tired talking about these